All right, good afternoon or good morning, young historians. Our study of Greece will end with learning more about the Golden Age and the enduring or lasting impacts of Greek civilization. We spent quite a bit of time talking about cultural diffusion and developing an awareness of how Greek culture spread. Now, in addition to what we know about government, we'll learn more about what was spread and what continues to influence our modern lives. The Golden Age of Athens defines a period of time where Athenians experienced great peace and wealth. This period of time occurred between two major conflicts, the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars. While this period only lasted for a little more than a century, the cultural explosion has dramatically influenced Western civilization and culture. Let's chat first a little bit about the first conflict that led to the Golden Age. Arguably, the two most significant city-states in Greece, Athens and Sparta, were very different from one another. And these differences often led the city-states to distrust each other. However, between 499 and 479 BCE, they had a common enemy, the Persian Empire. At the time, Persia was the largest empire the world had ever seen. Its powerful kings ruled over land in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. During the 400s BCE, the Persians invaded Greece and the Persian Wars began. To fight the Persians, the Greek city-states eventually bonded together as allies to fight the Persians. They agreed to help each other out against a common enemy. While Greece and its tiny city-states were the underdog, they ultimately win the Persian Wars. As you know, each war is made up of numerous smaller battles. Athens won key battles like the Battle of Marathon and the Battle of Salamis, where Greece's naval power dominated. Sparta reigned supreme in the Battle of Thermopylae, which gave birth to the legend of the 300 Spartans who fought until their weapons broke, and the Battle of Plataea. 20 years of battles led to a Greek victory, and by defeating the Persians, the Greeks were able to keep their government, a democracy, and during a time of rebuilding, were able to expand their own empire in a period of cultural growth and wealth. Take a look at this video here from 300 just to get a sense of the energy during the Persian Wars.
Nearly a year ago, long I pondered my king's cryptic talk of victory. Time has proven him wise. But from free Greek to free Greek, the word was spread that bold Leonidas and his 300, so far from home, laid down their lives, not just for Sparta, but for all Greece, and the promise this country holds. Now, here on this rugged patch of earth called Plataea, Xerxes' hordes face obliteration! Just there, the barbarians huddle, sheer terror gripping tight. Their hearts, with icy fingers, knowing full well what merciless horrors they suffered at the swords and spears of 300. Yet they stare now, across the plain, at 10,000 Spartans, commanding 30,000 free Greeks. Oh! The enemy outnumbers a paltry 3-1. Good odds for any Greek. This day, we rescue a world from mysticism and tyranny, and usher in a future brighter than anything we can imagine. Give thanks, man! To Leonidas and the brave 300!
All right. So, after the Persian Wars, during this time of rebuilding and increased prosperity, the Greek culture blew up. Like I said, architecture advanced, art expanded, philosophy was born and developed, math and science made great strides, and theater became an important part of life. Let's first take a look at what life looked like in Greece by taking a walking tour. As you watch, see what you notice about the buildings and the theaters. Jot your notes down in your notebook as you'll be asked to share what you noticed after the video. All right, first up, architecture. Temples are a good example of the Greeks' talent in architecture. These massive and beautiful buildings are still inspiring architecture around the world today. You'll see Miss Wilhelm, my history buddy, featured in many pictures she took while in Athens 2 years ago. The most famous of these temples was the Parthenon, where a magnificent statue of Athena stood 30 feet high. The Greeks used three kinds of columns in their designs: the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, from simplest to most complex. These buildings were many different sizes, but their basic shape was similar. Ultimately, this architecture style expressed both the Greeks' love of beauty and their awe of the gods. Where have you seen buildings with Greek style architecture? Next, let's take a look at Greek art. Both pottery and sculpture were popular forms of art in Athens during the Golden Age. The pottery was created to depict scenes of key events, religious figures, ordinary life, and the customs of the Greeks, which made pottery both functional in their storytelling and beautiful. What's really cool is that the historians have been able to interpret much of what we know about Greece from the pottery. The sculptures were a way to use human anatomy and perspective to create the ideals of beauty. The Greeks, as you are seeing, were very concerned with beauty. Statues were very lifelike and often molded the gods as perfect and larger than life. Marble and stone were used for statues, and as you'll remember, most of the temples featured statues of gods and goddesses as a central part. The people of Athens were lovers of wisdom, as life revolved around the power of education. This caused people to question their existence and challenge previously held beliefs, and thus, philosophy is born. Let's chat a little bit about each of the most famous philosophers. Socrates was a big fan of asking questions to encourage deeper thinking. Many educators use the Socratic method in their teaching to get students to challenge what they think to be true. Plato was inspired by Socrates and created the first academy in Athens. This was the first institution of higher education in the Western world, which is pretty epic. Plato mostly wrote about justice, equality, and politics, things that many of us are still interested in today. His writing really challenged what people thought and got them to think about alternative perspectives. This thinking was so important that society had three groups of people: those who were philosophers, kings, warriors, and then everyone else. Aristotle was considered the first teacher. He was taught by Plato. He thought Alexander the Great, who we'll talk about next week. Aristotle believed that walking encouraged thinking, which encouraged talking. He was well known for his walk and talks, where he would do his deepest thinking. Aristotle studied each city-state and classified how each polis was governed, which allowed others to learn about different government structures. He developed the concepts of ethos, pathos, and logos, which are persuasive techniques, essentially different styles of convincing your audience that you're right. For Aristotle, the main goal of life was to achieve happiness. Here's a little more detail about each philosopher. Go ahead and pause the video to read more and then continue reading. Choose one quote and explain what you think it means and why it is still relevant in the modern day. Identify your choice by stating the philosopher's name. Next up, we'll explore how the Greeks made their mark on math and science during the Golden Age. The Greeks loved reasoning. They looked for logical answers to nature's mysteries. Greek scientists often found the answers in mathematics. One such scientist, Pythagoras, believed that numbers were the key to understanding nature. He started a school where students developed mathematical theories. Like many Greeks, Pythagoras was especially fascinated by geometry. Geometry comes from a Greek word that means to measure land. Using geometry, they could figure out how much seed to buy for planting a field or how to lay out a city. Pythagoras created the Pythagorean method, which you will become very familiar with when you take geometry. With regard to medicine, for centuries, the Greeks believed that the gods and goddesses controlled natural events, including health and sickness. The earliest Greeks thought that illness and accidents were punishments sent by the gods. They didn't know about the natural causes of disease and healing. A Greek man named Hippocrates changed the way people thought about health and medicine. Hippocrates brought a scientific way of thinking to his work as a doctor. He believed that diseases had natural causes. He taught his students to carefully observe their patients and write down what they saw. Hippocrates is often called the father of modern medicine. Today, when people become doctors, they take what's called the Hippocratic Oath, where they promise to be honest, to preserve life, and to keep information about their patients private. As we toured Athens earlier, you saw many theaters.
Like buzzes.
As we toured Athens earlier, you saw many theaters. Theaters come from the Greek word that means a viewing place. Greek theaters were built as semicircles. The rows of seats rose steeply from the stage so that everyone in the audience could see and hear. These ideas heavily influence the way theaters are built today. The acoustics, like you can hear in the video, are unrivaled and were revolutionary for the time. Perhaps the greatest Greek contributions to theater are their stories and plays. Writers throughout the ages have been inspired by Greek myths and stories. Greek dramas are still performed today all over the world. Two types of dramas were tragedies and comedies. In a tragedy, the main character struggles to overcome hardships but does not succeed. As a result, the story has a tragic or unhappy ending. Some famous tragedies are Oedipus Rex and Antigone. The main difference between a tragedy and a comedy is that in comedies, the story ends happily. Aristophanes is perhaps the most famous comedic playwright, and his plays, The Birds and Lysistrata, are still well known today. His works poked fun at leaders and issues of his day. He encouraged people to think and to laugh. The final conflict that defined the Golden Age by ending it was the Peloponnesian War. At this point, Athens and Sparta are no longer allies. Athens was afraid of another Persian invasion, so they formed a defensive alliance of Greek city-states called the Delian League in 478 BCE. The Athenians did not invite the Spartans to join because they wanted to lead it. Of course, the Spartans' feelings were hurt, and they were also worried about the new powerful alliance of Greek city-states. So, Sparta created their own defensive league called the Peloponnesian League. The interests of both leagues clashed and resulted in a civil war that lasted 30 years. Ultimately, Sparta wins because of their great strength and fighting ability, but while they are good fighters, they were not good rulers. This stops Athens from ever becoming an empire and also ends democracy in Greece. Also, all the city-states in Greece were weakened from years of fighting, which allows them to be conquered by Macedonian King Philip II. Today you learned about just a few of the magnificent contributions that the Greeks made to Western civilization. The Greeks left us valuable ideas in many other fields as well, like fashion, language, the Olympics, literature, military, and war. Today we still use Greek words and ideas. Our form of government was invented by the Greeks, as well as many ideas used in modern medicine, mathematics, and science. You can see traces of Greek culture in our buildings, theaters, and sporting events. The Greeks were fiercely proud of their independence as a people, but as we've learned, their freedom did not last. Next week, we will be starting an Enduring Impacts project, where you will each be creating a museum display honoring one of the many Greek contributions. This is not a final decision, but which of these topics are you most interested in exploring for your project?